Hey guys, this is Tori Petersen with the I Love You Already podcast, where we talk about living and loving well. Today, I get to interview Liz Forkin-Bohannon, and we talk about speaking, we talk about traveling, social entrepreneurship, we talk about motherhood and women in leadership. If you're feeling a little sassy, this is an episode for you. Let's do it. We have Liz Forkin-Bohannon. Welcome to the I Love You Already podcast.
Hi, Tori. I am so excited to be here with you today.
I am so glad you're here. You're someone that I have admired for a pretty long time. I saw you speak 4 years ago at the Global Leadership Summit. And so during this podcast, it's probably going to sound like I'm just asking you a lot of disconnected questions because I feel like something really cool about you, Liz, is that you're not very niche and like niche. I never know how to say it. I love that though, because I think in like social media world, that's what we're encouraged to be and what we're encouraged to do, like stay in our lane. And I can tell you're like defiant of that. Yeah? Would you say that about yourself?
Tori, that tickles me so much because it makes me actually feel like, one, you are a very astute observer, and two, I feel very known because it isn't accidental. It is like in direct defiance of the world that tells us in order to be successful, you have to amass followers. And in order to amass followers, you have to have your niche and you're just one thing. And I'm just like, ew, I'm a human.
Yes.
Like I get it. Like I can run a company and be like, the company is a niche. And you know what? For people who do it, great. We're all called to different things. This isn't like this is good or bad. For me, to show up and to be like, I'm Liz Bohannon, the brand, and therefore I treat my existence in the universe like I would a brand or a company does not ring true to who I want to be. And so defiant is probably the word that I would use of like, I'm going to show up in all the different elements of my life, which is as a mother, as an entrepreneur, as a community builder, as a neighbor, as someone who just likes random things. And that's who I am. At least online, but online is a pretty good representation of just who I am in normal real life.
And what that does for everyone else is it just gives them permission to be the complex human beings that they are and not have to fit into a box. And so I really appreciate that. We start the podcast off with the same question every time, and that is, what is one act of love that you have received in your lifetime that has affected who you are?
Oh my gosh, one act of love that I have received in my lifetime. So I feel like I could think about some like really big, like grand gestures of love that have really been like markers in my journey. But I'm going to share one that is super fresh. And because it just feels like a marker of extreme love. So I had actually, this was probably maybe 3 weeks ago, I had a little conflict with one of my besties. So as I was sharing with you, Tori, I live in Portland, Oregon, on what I kind of half jokingly refer to as an urban commune. I call it that because I live intentionally with some friends. We share property, we share finances, we share childcare and like just like daily responsibilities. We are really trying to experiment with this idea of what would it be like to live together with a sense of honesty, transparency, interdependence, and doing community in that way. So that's kind of my life, but we live very close to each other. So there is a lot of opportunity for conflict. And I will say we're at a point in our journey, we've been at this long enough where it just doesn't happen that much. Like we just assume the best about each other. There's so much trust. There's just so much affection. But the other day, probably about 3 weeks ago, we were at a birthday party and my kid did something and that was not great. And whatever, we dealt with it. I took him out, blah, 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 blah. The point being, I came back into the party and I was standing around and my friend didn't know that I was standing there. And she kind of made a remark about the incident. And it really hurt my feelings. It wasn't even that bad. Like it was not dramatic. Like it never would have made like an episode of Real Housewives of Portland. You know, like it wasn't horrible, but it was just kind of like, oh, boo. Like, I don't feel like you're giving my kid or me the benefit of the doubt in that. And it really hurt my feelings. And so, you know, when we get our feelings hurt, a lot happens to us physiologically,
Yeah.
right? Like our heart rate starts to increase, like our blood supply increases. We might start to sweat. Our face might flush. I get sick to my stomach. Like I just immediately feel stuff in my gut. And I kind of had this moment where I was like, okay, I have to make a choice. Do I just tell myself like, there's three things I could have done, I guess. I could have, one, been like, stop being such a baby and stop being so sensitive. Like, just let it go. I could have, two, been like, who is she to say that about me and my kid? Like, what does she think? She's a perfect mom? Like, screw you. No. The third being, I just have to tell my friend. I have to tell my friend how that made me feel. And so I picked the third. The party got over. I followed her home. I said, hey, I have to talk to you about something. And I hate it. Like, it's horrible. It's like my whole narrative is like, you're being such a baby. Like, your feelings shouldn't be hurt. Like, blah, blah, don't make this a big deal. But I told her, and she looked at me, and one, she just immediately apologized, like took complete ownership for it.
Yeah.
And she was like, I am so sorry. As soon as it came out of my mouth, I kind of was like, why did you say that? Like, you were just filling space. Like, that wasn't cool. Like, she just looked at me and she apologized. And then here's where the extreme act of love came in, because she had kind of cut me off. She was like, was it when I said that thing? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, I'm so sorry. As soon as it came out of my mouth, I regretted saying it. I'm so sorry that you heard that. And then she looked at me and she goes, I'm sorry. I cut you off. Will you tell me everything about how that made you feel? And I just started bawling. Like, I just started bawling, and I started telling her everything about how it made me feel. I was like, I already have this insecurity, and I already worry about him for these reasons. And I already have this insecurity that when we walk out of a room, people are going to think that or say that. And then I walked into the room and you were literally saying the thing that my insecurity is that people say about us when we walk out of a space. And she just she just was like nodding emphatically. She's like, yeah, of course you felt that way. I'm so sorry I contributed to that insecurity. She just created so much space for me to feel my feelings, even though they were, one, hard feelings, and two, hard feelings that she caused. But that response of, will you tell me everything about how that thing that I did to you made me feel, felt like such an immense act of love. Because what I heard from that was, hey, your feelings in our relationship is so much more important than me defending myself right now, or than me protecting myself, or than me looking like I'm a great friend, or whatever identity thing I have to preserve right now. What I felt from her in that moment was, you are important. Your feelings matter. We have a robust enough relationship that I can handle hearing how I hurt you. And together we can move through that. And we did. And we reconciled. And because she gave me the opportunity to say all of my things, I just, by the end of it, felt more connected, more trust, just more confident that we have a relationship that can handle hard things, and that we're both going to make mistakes in our relationship, and that's fine. But for me, not only did it feel like an extreme act of love, it also felt really like it was teaching for me. Because I was like, I'm putting that in my pocket. That phrase, will you tell me everything about how I made you feel, is next time I'm in conflict, it will not be easy. I think that will be a scary question to ask, but it felt like a moment where I really learned how to be a good friend too.
Yeah, she held space for everything. Have you ever heard of the apology languages? It's very similar to love languages. I think, if I remember right, it's even written by the same person. Have you heard of apology language?
I have. It's vague, but it's repair.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, so, there's the 3 R or the 4 R's maybe?
Yes, I think so. And I just me learning about them very recently, but I would just encourage anybody listening to this to go look at your apology love language. How do you receive apologies? For me, I really want people to take responsibility. I want people to say, I did do this. I want them to admit I think that's one of the R's, responsibility.
It is. Responsibility, remorse, repair.
Yeah.
Anyway, we should have show notes for
I
this,
feel yes, I feel like what she did was she repaired by holding everything that was hard for you. One of the things that my husband and I have done, when you said that you live in community in this way, it reminded me of this. We have allowed students in college, university to come and live with us for a summer and work as like my intern for the ministry and the brand. And it has been so interesting. I think because I grew up in the foster care system, and I think because I moved around from like home to home to home, I do not mind at all like being around people in my house, like having different people in my house. But to them, like it is so foreign. And like being really close in the way that you are close, I think is a very foreign concept. So, how did you get there?
Yes, I agree. I will say it's very foreign to live in that way in 2024 as Americans, and specifically upwardly mobile, educated Americans.
With a
And I
family.
say that with, pardon?
With a family too.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. All of these factors make it very foreign. But I will say it is not foreign to 80% of people globally, right? So I feel like the way that I am living is actually much more normative than the way the average upper middle class educated American is living. And so yeah, if that is your demographic of people you are welcoming into your home, it's going to be super foreign. If you go pretty much anywhere else in the world, it's a much more common way of existing, which is my perception of it is that that's why we are also in the midst of a loneliness epidemic here in the United States. Literally, the Surgeon General of the United States last year issued a declaration saying that we are in the midst of a loneliness epidemic, that we've never seen rates of loneliness and isolation. Deaths of despair is a new kind of category in the medical world to categorize deaths that are being caused by people who are in despair and who are lonely and who are isolated. And I think there is a direct correlation between the fact that we are living in the midst of a loneliness epidemic and the way that we have designed our lives, the things we think make us happy. And in America, we value independence, we value privacy, we value safety, we value rights, individual rights. I don't think any of those things are wrong. Like they all have value. The reality is, however, when you're designing a life, you pick a certain set of values that you're going to prioritize over other values. And things like privacy, safety, individual rights, independence are all kind of on a different side of the spectrum than things like proximity, interdependence, honesty, transparency, a life where you're kind of regularly submitting your own kind of rights and desires and privileges for the sake of the good and for the sake of the whole. I think, unfortunately, a lot of Americans have run real fast and hard towards one side of the spectrum. And what we're living in right now is the implication of designing lives that really prioritize those values. And so I have had the incredible experience of living all over the globe, of not just living, but working and having colleagues. And like, it's one thing to travel on vacation. It's a very different thing to go to a country and to try to create business and colleagues and partnerships and movements. And you learn a lot. You learn a lot about different cultures and how people live and really what their priorities are, what their values are when you do that. And so through my experience of getting to live first in East Africa, North Africa, working in India, South America, Southeast Asia, one of the realizations that I had is like kind of back to what's foreign versus what's normal, of going like, oh, whoa, we're the oddballs. Like we're the ones, like the rest of the world really prioritizes interdependence, proximity, and connection and the good of the whole in a way that felt foreign to me as an American. And so I kind of just, I love social experiments. I think ideas are really cool, but like at the end of the day, if you're not trying to put your ideas into reality, there's just like a certain value ceiling that you hit. And so my thought was, I want to take what I've learned from all of these communities that seem, frankly, even though they are materially, wow, that's a really hard word to say. Materially more poor, are much richer when it comes to a sense of support and connection and belonging. and kind of going, what are those cultures doing? What values are they prioritizing? And how could I do that in my life? In like modern America, like, let me be very clear. When I say we live on a commune, I am not a homesteader. Like, I am not homeschooling my children. God bless you if that is your path. Like, I drive a car, I shop at Target, like, I am a working woman, I travel all over the globe. Like, I live a very modern American life, but going, what would it look like to just live a normal American life, but to do it with the priority of building connection, support, and community? And so that's what we're doing.
Yeah. You're keyed in to what's happening globally because of your work, because of Sseko, I'm assuming. Can you explain to people what is Sseko? What is your work?
Yeah. So Sseko, when I was about 20, gosh, I don't even know how old I was, 21, 22. I should just fact check myself. I tell the story enough. I had studied journalism and I was really interested in issues that were facing women and girls living in extreme poverty and in conflict and post-conflict zones. I couldn't get a job in journalism. Turns out, no, the Associated Press is not interested in hiring a 22-year-old who has literally never left the United States to go do international reporting. Okay, so figured that out the hard way. Long story short, I couldn't get a job. I couldn't get anybody to hire me. And so I just decided I would just go. I would go. I quit my first corporate job like 2 months out of college, and I bought a one-way plane ticket to Uganda.
Wow, Liz, you're so cool. What?
Cool or a little kooky. I don't know. The verdict's still out. We'll
definitely,
see.
yeah.
But and my whole goal was honestly just to learn and to build community. I had kind of had this moment where I was like, girl, you sure have a lot of opinions about how the world works, right? Like, I knew a lot about these big global issues and gender inequality, but I really had this come to Jesus moment where I was like, you sure think about this a lot. You can talk about it a lot. But when I look at my actual life, my friend group, my community, how I spend my time, my money, my resources, my energy, it doesn't look like you care that much about that thing, right? And so that was a real come to Jesus moment for me, that there was like this delta between what I said I was passionate about and cared about and then how I was designing my life. And that was the thing that kind of compelled me to quit my job. I moved to Uganda with literally the goal of making friends and just being like, if I'm going to care about this, I have to have friends who are impacted by this. And so that's what I did. And long story kind of long, I ended up meeting a group of girls in between high school and university that were like top 5% of students in the country,
Wow.
but couldn't afford to go to university. And so there's a 9-month gap in Uganda in between high school and university. And so what was happening is these girls were going home. They had been in kind of like a really academically rigorous college prep 2-year program. Think of it more like a boarding school. And what happened was they were graduating from high school. They were testing into college. They were going back home to their villages for that 9-month gap. And many of them, even though they got into college, weren't coming back. And that was because, one, they didn't have the social support that they needed. A lot of them were the only girls in their entire village to complete high school, let alone have aspirations for going on to university. And there was just a ton of social pressure for them to not go to college, to get married, to start having kids. These are, girls, they're 17, 18 years old. And then the second challenge that they were facing is they couldn't find jobs. Like, there was no economic opportunity for them. So even if they had families that were supportive of them continuing on to college, the financial burden was just too great. And so I did a couple things to try to help bridge that gap that failed pretty miserably. And then I landed on these strappy, funky sandals and thought, okay, if we could figure out how to make these sandals here, I could go back home to the US and sell these sandals. I could keep these girls employed during that 9-month gap so that they could stay in community with other like ambitious, like-minded young women. They could earn money and then they could go to college. And that's how it all started. So we started with 3 young women, Mary, Mercy, and Rebecca, making these strappy sandals under a mango tree in Uganda. And I came home and started slinging sandals out of the back of my car.
And then they got to go to school.
And then they got to go to college. And I will never forget, it was back in the day, so it was Skype. I Skyped one of my friends who took his smartphone out to the school because they don't even have internet out there. And we got to share that we had sold enough sandals to send those first 3 women to university. And I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. And going like, well, obviously we have to do it again next year.
Yes, I literally have goosebumps because Only 3% of former foster youth go on to get a bachelor's degree or higher. And so, and from when I was a little girl, Liz, like I swear my mom started telling me when I was 3, she was like, you got to go to college. You got to go to college. My biological mom, there's nothing more that she wanted for me than to be an educated woman. And I appreciated that about her so much while I was growing up, like, and especially now that I am an educated woman. But I know that like that opportunity for me is even like a smaller deal like than what it is to them. And that's just such an incredible story that you sold sandals to get them to college. John Maxwell, he named you the one of the top 3 transformational leaders, which I think is absolutely incredible. And I know Liz, I know you're like, that's great. I know you're grateful for it, but it's not like a badge of honor that you wear and like dote around. But I think in the space of Christianity, sometimes women being in leadership, women are like, am I allowed to do that? Is that something we're allowed to even talk about? Can you talk about what you believe about women in leadership?
Ooh, wait, we're going for it.
We're going there, girl.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it is. Such a good question. And I love being asked it because, when you have a certain ideology for so long, it kind of just becomes normative to you. Because I feel like I haven't articulated this in a long time, and I'm going back and remembering like, no, probably 10 years ago, that was something that you maybe thought through or wrestled through more, specifically with, the role of that women can and should occupy in society, but specifically in the church. And I have a very deep belief. I have a very deep belief that Jesus was so revolutionary. And one of the things that really saddens me about our understanding of scripture and of Jesus and of what he came to do is I think so often we read Jesus's actions or words or the things that he did through the lens of culture of like 2024 America. And if you're doing that, if you're going like, well, what did Jesus say? And you're thinking about our culture, it would be very easy to come to some certain conclusions that actually seem quite regressive or quite old school or quite traditional. But the reality is when we look at the Bible and when we look at what was normative in specifically New Testament time, what we actually see is this radical revolutionary figure who is going all that old stuff about hierarchy and about who gets to be the boss and about who gets to, have the honor and about who gets to be trusted with specific messages. All of that, Jesus completely flipped on his head and said, no, actually, like you have a seat at the table here. Mm-hmm. And does that mean that how I created you, male or female, doesn't matter or that it's completely up to you or that it's totally irrelevant? Like, no, I don't actually believe that. I think gender is intentional and it's a part of the divine design that we see from the beginning of scripture. But should that be the thing that like is the single determinant of the role that you get to occupy? I would argue that Jesus's life would be an emphatic answer of like, no to that. Like Jesus's early ministry was funded by wealthy women. Like Jesus used women. Like the enormity of the fact that women were the first to see the empty tomb and to go out and to tell other people can kind of feel like, okay, could have been a man, could have been a woman, until you realize that in New Testament time, a woman wasn't even allowed to be an eyewitness in court, right? Like a woman witnesses a murder in the middle of the street and says, I saw it all. I know what happened. And the court would have said, sorry, that doesn't matter. We're going to say in this case, there were no eyewitnesses and we don't know what happened. Like that is how despised and unreliable women were at that point. And you're going to tell me it was an accident that Jesus said, actually, the miracle. And by the way, a miracle that was pretty far-fetched and unbelievable. And when I say unbelievable, I mean like not believable. That's a hard thing to believe, that a dead guy went in a tomb and then he rose from the freaking dead and then the tomb was empty. Him going like, you know who I'm going to choose to bear witness to that and then to go tell the world? It's going to be women. And it's specifically going to be women that were kind of like despised. by culture, and already people had reason not to believe them. And it's just very hard. Like, it's very hard for me to hear that story and then come away with it being like, oh, in order to be close to Jesus and chase after him, you need to be quiet, and you need to just hold back.
Mm-hmm. Growing up, my mom, I was always allowed to take up as much space as I wanted as a girl. Like, as there was never any question about I couldn't do something because I was a female. And I loved that about my mom, is that like and she was a single mom, so she took up a lot of space. So she just taught me to take up a lot of space. And then it wasn't until I got into ministry and I started preaching and teaching the word and talking about God that I started to hear, instead of speaker out here, woman speaker, or instead of teacher out here, woman teacher, or even writer out here, woman writer. And I was like, no, I'm just like a speaker. I don't know why I am a woman, but I don't understand why we have to put that in front of it. And so I'm just thankful that you spoke into that, because I also believe that God does want to see women in ministry and women in leadership. And I think that that'll be so encouraging for people to hear. I read your book, Beginner's Pluck, and in it, you have this quote that I wrote down. It says, "Your passion is not found in your dream. It is found in your doing." And in that, you explain that you didn't have time, and you couldn't have created an advisory board for Sseko. You couldn't have spent a year trying to plan. You just had to jump into it. So can you tell me the story of just jumping into it without a plan?
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the greatest misnomers, especially kind of in the self-help realm of the last 10 years, is the way we talk about purpose and the way we talk about passion. Because I think it kind of separates people into people who got it and people who don't. And then the people who got it trying to sell it to the people that don't. And it's like some magical, mystical thing that happened and everybody wants it.
And that's now how we've gotten into this world of being scammed by digital resources.
yes, 100%. And it's led people to this sense that your passion and your purpose is just innate. It's something, we hear these stories that it's well, ever since I was 4, I started baking, and then, people loved my baking and I was passionate about it. And then I went on to build a multi-million-dollar baking empire, whatever it is. And what that ends up doing is it kind of creates this sense in people, in the average person, because about 80% of people would say in their young adult years, when asked, what's your purpose? What are you passionate about 80% of people would be like, I don't know. I don't really that. And then there are the 20%, the little girl who started baking when she was 4 and was just always passionate about whatever. That 20% is real. And I don't want to dismiss that 20%. But the 20% story gets told over and over and over again. And so it creates this dominant narrative that makes the average person, that makes the 80% feel like something's wrong with you. Something's messed up with you. You're broken. You should just think more. You should just think more. You should wait to have a dream. Someday, if you're lucky, your passion or your purpose will be revealed to you. And I just don't think that's how it works. In fact, the word passion, the way that we use it, I'm sure if you just, searched on Instagram, people posting about passion, what you're going to hear are people, drinking a mojito on the beach being like, this is my passion. And I'm making money while I'm on the beach because I'm living my life. And it's so full of passion and purpose. The word passion, the root word is actually pati, which is Latin for to suffer for, to suffer for. What is it that you're willing to suffer for and to sacrifice greatly for? That's actually passion. Passion isn't something that is always just easy or magical or energetic. And so I think if we can think about our passion and our purpose less as something that we can just find or discover, and instead it's something you build. And in order to build it, you got to freaking just get in the ring. and you got to do the thing and you got to try. And there's going to be things that you try and you go, wow, that is not for me. This is not life-giving. I don't feel energy from this. I don't feel like I'm contributing a lot of value. And that's like, okay, great. That might not be your thing. But if we don't have a spirit of a little bit more like, go experiment, go be willing to be surprised. So for me, it was like, I moved to Uganda and I had a journalism degree and would have said I was passionate about equality and social justice. Not only did I not enjoy business or have any experience with it, I was frankly kind of like biased against it. Like when I was in college, I was like just pretty far on the idealism side of like, you know, like good people are social workers and people in social justice and journalists and people who run nonprofits. And then everybody else is just trying to get rich and make money and kind of build their kingdom at any cost. Okay. So it's kind of like anti-not business. And then I was super not fashion-y, and not just, again, because I was pretty judgmental and black and white. Not only was it like, I don't care about fashion, it was like, if you care about fashion, you probably don't know what's going on in Syria. You know, like you're probably shallow and materialistic. Okay. So it's kind of embarrassing, but I actually love that God used the two things that I was like, those can't really be good, business and fashion, and was like, oh, sweet girl. Oh, sweet girl. I'm gonna serve you humble pie every single morning because here I am running for-profit businesses, specifically in the fashion space. But I became passionate about those things. I built a passion for business and for fashion, not by thinking about it or like going to a seminar or hoping I was going to be inspired, like by just going out into the universe without a plan, trying and failing and being really curious and taking note about what lights me up, what gets me excited. And frankly, it was really humbling when it was sandals and not chickens, because I was like, but I'm not a fashion person, but I keep staying up until 3:00 in the morning, like tinkering and trying and figuring this out. Like, okay, maybe you kind of are, like, maybe you like this, and being willing to just be open-handed and to experiment and to try.
And you are willing to suffer for it. I love that that is where passion, that's what passion actually means. And you're willing to suffer for it to the point that you went onto Shark Tank and they denied you. And I want to talk about that because there are so many people who pursue their dreams and then they feel like they failed and they're done. And I mean, that was obviously a very public thing. That could have like been like, this is a very public failure. I'm done. Why didn't you quit? How did you have the gumption to keep going?
Oh, it's such a good question, because I think the answer is, you know, there was this moment in Shark Tank that kind of became like a meme in our community that somebody, I didn't even really realize it, but somebody watched it and they like made a meme out of it and shared it in our community. And it was this moment where I don't know what I was saying, but I was saying something about Sseko. And Kevin O'Leary literally goes, he's like, what do you mean? Like, I've never even literally heard of your brand before. And apparently, I think I kind of blacked out. I just like looked at him and I go, oh, you will. Like, who the heck am I? But you know, like, I think that there was just like this deep belief. Here's the thing. When you follow your passion and your purpose, I actually think what gave me resiliency is different than what people would say. Like, okay, you got to set goals and then you got to stick to that goal. But my goal was never, honestly, to have like a wildly successful business. As I mentioned, I was like not even into business and I wasn't into fashion. What I was passionate about and what I was obsessed with was the problem that we were trying to solve. And how we did it and the like degree of like commercial success, or if some big fancy real estate investor thought my business idea was good or not, just didn't really matter that much to me, because I'm like, what they are looking for is a business that they think on a commercial level, when you look at my P&L statement, is going to be a wildly successful business. And like, actually, what's driving me is, how do we build a business that creates authentic and real community and connection and relationships? How are we building a business that employs people? How are we creating a product that really gets consumers to change their mind and to start thinking about this, you know, global fashion supply chain differently? The hope is, and the only way I get to do that is if I have a successful business. But like, if you're not aligned with me, like your opinion just doesn't like weigh that much.
Let's
It's
go.
like you have a different view of what success looks like,
Yeah.
which is great. That's fine. You do you. That's not mine. So when you tell me I'm not going to be successful, I'm going to be like, noted, but like, you don't get to drive the bus.
Yeah.
Like, you're not the ultimate authority on whether or not I'm going to be successful.
We all need to function more like that in our space. Like, if you are not mission aligned and you want to put me down, peace. Like, my life, I don't want my life to look like yours. So, no, thank you.
There's somebody said once, and I don't know who it was, but it was like, stop asking directions for people who are not where you want to go. Like, people that are over here and you're like, I don't want to end up there. Well, why are you asking directions from that person then?
Yeah.
Now, the opposite side of that is that when I meet somebody who is aligned, who I'm like, they get where I want to go, or they are where I want to be, then I actually give those people probably more authority than the average person does. Where I'm like, in my personal life, I have a very strong view on authority and on who I submit my authority to. And if you are in my inner circle of people who I've been like, listen, you have shown yourself to be for me. You have shown yourself to understand where it is that I want to go. And you are either just fully in support of that, or you are already there. If you come to me and you say, ooh, like, I have a concern, or, ooh, I don't think that's a good idea. My commitment to those people is, I will not take another step without at least hearing you out and asking you follow-up questions and submitting myself, honestly, to your authority, because I do believe, like, part of community is that sometimes our people can see stuff in us that we can't see in ourselves. And that's one of the most beautiful parts of community, is that we get to kind of serve as that. In the Mennonite tradition, they have this thing that they call clearing committees. And if someone's like really wrestling through a decision in their life, in their family, in their business, whatever it is, they can come, they gather their people around, and they have what they call a clearing committee. And people just gather, and they literally, you are just in the hot seat, and they just ask you questions and help kind of unpeel. Okay, well, why are you afraid of that? Or what is the purpose of that goal, or that, success thing that you've set out? And I just think that that's such a beautiful picture of what we are to be to one another. And so it really is a fine balance between, like, knowing who is in your inner circle and actually submitting to them and giving them a level of authority in your life, but then also going, well, if you're not in that inner circle, like, great, I'll jot down your opinions. And also, I think as believers, one of the prayers that I pray often for myself and for those that I love is like, if it's of God, let it stick. And if it's not, let it roll. And just really submitting to the Holy Spirit of going like, okay, noted, I'm writing that down. And if it's of the Lord, Lord, will you convict me of that? Lord, will you help it to weigh heavier in my heart? But if it is not of you, just let it go. Let it flit away.
Yes, someone is going to be blessed that you just said that. I have a good amount of, I don't know what to say when you say followers. I feel like that's such a weird way to put it, but you know what I'm saying? The people who listen and see the things. I have had the opportunity the past 2 years to help people who want to tell their stories, tell them in a way of like their vocation, like we do. And they had some questions for me that I was given like in a Q&A, but I was like, I actually think these would be better for Liz. So let's put them on Liz. Because you were voted Forbes top 20 speakers. And again, I know you don't even wear these like things as a badge of honor, but it really is so incredible. And so how do we become good communicators, especially good speakers?
Ooh, I could go on here. There's one thing I love to talk about. I love to talk about talking. That's how much I love talking, is that I can talk about talking. Okay. No, truly, communication in all different forms is truly such a passion of mine, whether that is from a one-on-one, how do we communicate within friendships and relationships, all the way to being on stages. I think if I had to narrow it down, I would say the most powerful thing that you can do as a communicator is realize that it's really not about you. And show up in a space less of, how do I look good? How do I be funny? How do I be poignant? And instead go, what does this room need? And how can I serve? How can I serve in this space? And when you shift the focus from it being about, like, the former is a mentality, if you're like a performer And if you're a performer, like awesome. That's also an amazing vocation. But I imagine like what you're thinking about is different. Whereas if you're just communicating and you're trying to share a story, and that story is meant to communicate a transformative truth, the people in the room are the most important part, and kind of thinking about how you can serve people in the room. And that also just that shift of focus away from you as kind of an extraordinary performer to how can I be with the people in this room, just positions you. It creates a different energy. One, I find myself to be a lot less nervous because it's less about me being like perfect or showy or, saying the exact right thing, and more about how can I create a space that's safe where people can receive information in a way that moves them and encourages them to make a change in their own life. I think I was on a podcast with Craig Groeschel, who's an incredible communicator himself. And he said the phrase, there's a difference. What was it? He said, do you want to make a point or do you want to make a change? And I think that is such a fantastic question for communicators to ask themselves. Do you just want to go out there and make a point? And if that's the purpose, here's what I'm telling you will happen. The people who already agree with you will clap and they'll amen and they'll woot and holler. And then the people that don't will kind of write you off or feel dismissed. That's how you make a point. And that basically is what happens on social media all day, every day. It's just people making points. They're making their points and they're making the people that are already in their camp be like, yeah, you get it. And they're isolating people that aren't with them. What communicators do and what change makers do is meet people where they're at and say, hey, I've been there. I am with you. Will you come on this journey and we can do it together? And those are two very different ways of approaching how we communicate with people.
Yeah. I think about like connection. That's the word that keeps coming to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't, like when we communicate, we want to connect with the audience. It's not just, it's even though sometimes when you're communicating from a stage, it's like a monologue, like could possibly be the only one speaking the entire time. You still want it to feel like it's a conversation, like you care. So that's something that I always think about when I communicate, like care and connection. When you actually care about the people, you're going to connect with them and they're going to connect with what you're saying. And if they connect with what you're saying, it's actually going to serve them. Yeah, what you said was so good. Okay. The other question they had was, how do you carry, well, they asked me this, but I'm asking you this because I'm like, Liz going to answer all this way better than me. How do you carry motherhood, social entrepreneurship, speaking, traveling, all the things? They said, how do you balance it? But I don't like that word. I don't like it. So I put carry in there.
Okay. So my first question that I'm going to ask, which is not going to be very satisfying to how do you balance it all or how do you carry it all, is just honest question. I want to know, are your people going to ask that same question?
To a man.
To a dude.
Yes.
To a dude. That's my first question.
That's a great question.
If your answer is no, then you have some work to do. And that even the fact that you would only think to ask me that question shows that you're actually perpetuating some pretty unfair assumptions and stereotypes. And those things will not only not be great for other people, but like it's going to keep you from ever feeling like you're doing enough because you are buying into the idea that is somehow inherently more difficult for a woman than it is for a man. Now, here's the thing about the question. I actually think it's a beautiful question. And I'm sure there are specifically female entrepreneurs who might take more of a thought where it's like, listen, my business is my life. And don't ask me about how I'm like raising kids on top of it because I care. Like I have defined success as by being this successful person out in the world. That is not me. Like, I want to be successful in my vocation. I want to have successful businesses, but like my view of a successful life is I am engaged in motherhood and raising my kids in a way that I feel like I am present and I am intentional and my kids get the best of me. I care a lot about my marriage. Like my best version of my life is I'm celebrating my 15th anniversary in May, and there's just like no version of my best life that doesn't include a lifelong marriage to a partner. I care deeply about what my neighbors think about me. And like, do I show up in my community? I care about my friendships. I care about these global causes. So it's like my version of success is actually doing all of those things. So I don't think that the question itself is wrong or bad. It's just that when we only assume women should be carrying this of going, how do you build like a full life that balances vocation and family and in community? That's actually a question that we should just be asking everybody, because it's a really valuable question. And I think the answer comes back to defining what success looks like for you. If you don't take the time and energy to define what success looks like for you, the world will define it for you. And I'm telling you, if you let somebody else define what success looks like, you are literally never going to be successful. Because it's impossible. Like, it is impossible, because you're going to be kind of cherry picking what success looks like to like 100 different people, and you can't live that life. It's like literally impossible to be successful doing this and to be successful doing that. And you're just going to constantly feel like you're failing everybody. And so it really starts with, what does a good life look like for me? And being totally like, this is where I think knowing if somebody isn't in your like inner circle, like if one of my best friends or my husband's or my kid came to me and was like, hey, we feel like we're not getting the best of you because you're prioritizing work over us, that to me would be like red flag, pause it all, go back to the drawing board, figure it out. Like, that would be a really big deal for me. Some stranger on the internet saying something about how it looks like I don't care about my kids because I take 10-day trips to Africa. Like, I'm sorry, Susan. Like, you did, like, you don't know. Like, because here's the reality. Part of my view of being a successful parent, like, especially with my travel away from my kids, even the narrative and the way people ask me about that creates this, the subtext of it is, the ideal for a child is having a mother that is with them all day, every day, and does not leave them. Okay, that's like, so is it hard on your kids? How do you balance it? Like, it's so the standard of success is like to bat 1,000. Is that right? From a sports perspective? 100%. We'll go with that. To be 100% mom. This is like the standard of success. So anything below that actually is kind of chipping away at your kids, at your family, about who you are as mom. Well, Susan, that's actually not my vision, even for my kids. Like, my view and what I am put here on earth to do with my family and my children is I want to raise 3 boys who are kind, who are compassionate, who are self-reliant, who are independent, who feel a sense of safety and security, not just with their biological parents and their nuclear family, but feel like they're a part of a bigger whole of community. I want them to actually be men that grow up and believe that women have gifts to give in the world and that they are called to that and that they can be chasing after the Lord while they do that. That's actually what I want for my kids. And that does not, for me, align with I stay at home with my kids all day, every day, and I never leave them. So, for example, like, I think that leaving my children to travel, what that has done in our family is created a culture where mom and dad are equal and competent caregivers. Like, when I leave for a trip, my kids do not wig out. They do not freak out. It is not dramatic. And there is, I think there's the small part of us, like some of us more than others, feel the sense of like, but I need to be needed. We almost like create dependency in our kids because it feels so good to be like, only mommy can do that.
Which
Mom's
is so
the only
unhealthy.
one, and everything's going to fall to crap if we just leave it to dad. That is a narrative that self-soothes your like ego. But like, is that what you want your kids to believe? And I'm like, well, I want my sons specifically to see is that like being a dad is a vocation, and that your dad, who is a male, is competent. He can take care of you. He is reliable. That is available to you when you grow up. Like, this is a model of what that looks like. And we have created that culture in our home. Same with when my husband leaves. He travels a fair amount for work. My kids don't bat an eye. It's like, cool. We're home with mom. She's competent. She takes care of us. She's great. So that's actually, that is, to me, I look at that and be like, we're kind of nailing it in this area. Like, that is the ideology that I hope my children ascribe to. And we are building a life that facilitates that. We are living in the context of a really close community. And what we are modeling to our kids is, hey, it's okay to ask for help. right? So whereas someone might be like, oh my gosh, you got caught up in that board meeting and you couldn't get to school on time to pick up your kids. You failed as a mom. And I'm like, oh, Susan, you've got it so wrong. Because here's what happened. I got caught up in the board meeting. I couldn't get to school on time. I called my best friend and she was able. She's like a caring, known community member. My best friend picked up my kids, brought them back to the house where she happens to live on the same property. And then 45 minutes later, I got to walk in. We resumed normal family. Um, are you kidding me? I didn't fail. What I did was what in that moment, I was teaching my kids, you can ask for help. And hey, also, one of the greatest priorities of your life should be sewing into community, into relationships, into building a life where you're allowed to ask for help and where people are reliable and they show up for each other. And then next week, we're probably going to get a call and we're going to do the same for that family. That's not a failure as a mother. Like, I actually think that that's maybe I'm tooting my own horn too much. I think that's a metric for success.
Yeah. No, I think it's such a refreshing perspective that so many moms are craving.
Yeah, because otherwise, also let's just like look at how that narrative is working out for the average woman in America. Like,
it's crushing.
I don't know. I'm a part of like some Facebook groups and some online spaces that are primarily moms. And the mom martyrdom culture, I'm like, who is this serving? Tell me, because you seem miserable. You are miserable. You are resentful. You are not healthy. I cannot imagine that you are showing up with like joy and presence and creativity and energy for your kids because you kind of hate your life. You resent your husband, but yet because you carry all of the mental load and yet you're completely unwilling for something to be done in maybe a slightly different way. And so you take back, you demand all of that back. You are in a prison of your own making. And even that question of how do I balance it all without letting any balls drop is like, it's making us, and I don't say this lightly, it is making us mentally unwell. Like, we are just living in a weird, bizarre reality that we have created. And this is where I'll come back and say, and the rest of the world does not operate like this. So I have a really dear friend and colleague. Her name is Agnes. We've worked together in the context of Sseko for many, many years. And she was in the US recently and we were just kind of chatting. She has 4 girls. I have 3 boys. So we're just like talking about our experience with motherhood. And I was just trying to, I was really struck because she actually used that same example of I'm stuck late at the factory. I can't go get my kids to pick up my kids from school. The most natural thing in the world for Aggie to do is to call her neighbor. And in America, we have this sense of like, I can't ask for help. I'm burdening other people. Like, they're going to think I don't have my act together or I'm a bad mom because I'm running late and can't get my kids, whatever it is. And I'll never forget Aggie looking at me and saying like, if my neighbor, not even my best friend, if my neighbor knew that I was experiencing so much stress and trying to solve my own problems and I didn't ask for help, that would cause conflict in my community.
Like, she would be offended. Like, the neighbor would be offended.
Yeah. Like, mad and be like, who are you? And like, who do you think you are that you don't need your people? Like, you're better than all of us. You think you can do this all on your own? Like, it would literally be a relational, cultural, social cost for her to be struggling and to not ask for help. But we live in a culture where it's the exact opposite, where like what we think we're believing is you need to be able to do it all on your own. And to ask for help is embarrassing. It's a sign of failure. It's you're over your skis, whatever it is. And so I am so encouraged and inspired when I can be reminded that it is like, okay, that we are living in la la land. Like, we have created this reality and it is not serving us. But the beautiful thing when you realize and you take responsibility, like, we've created this culture that says this is what it looks like to be a great mom, is we also have the power to change the narrative. But we can't change it for another mom unless we're living fully in it ourselves, right? Like, if I'm still showing up in a sense of shame and like, I'm a crappy mom and I apologize every time I have to leave my kids. Also, wow, I know I'm rabbit trailing. So if you need to edit this out, you can. No. But like, hello, our children pick up on our emotional cues.
Yeah.
Like, when I leave for a work trip, like even my language around that is like, I'm leaving. Isn't this amazing? Like, God gave me this incredible opportunity and I'm so excited about it for this and this. And I'm going to come home and I'm going to tell you stories about that. And I'm also really excited for the special time you're going to get with, to have with dad. And we have our kind of different routines and all of those things. Like, so my kids, like, of course, if every time I leave my kids, I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I feel so bad. I'm such a horrible mom. Like, I'm going to be home so soon. And like our kids pick up on that,
Yeah.
and they pick
Our
up on it and go,
narratives matter.
oh, this is a bad thing that she's doing.
Yeah.
We kind of get to define that narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. Our narratives matter. Liz, the legacy that you have left with your voice and your actions, I feel like sometimes it's like one or the other. Like a lot of people, they get to like be in a lane where they leave a legacy with their voice. And then some people, they like leave a legacy with what they do with their actions. And you have so clearly done both. And it is absolutely
Tori.
incredible. I love you. And I'm so thankful that you were on this podcast with me.
Well, that is so kind. Thank you for those very encouraging words. And I hope that our listeners in your community here today, that my hope and prayer is that maybe there's just like one small thing that God will use in their life.
Oh, yeah.
And that frankly, the rest that doesn't serve them, they'll just absolutely forget. So that's my hope.
I love you.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing this space for me. And thank you for the work that you're doing in the world as well.
Thank you, Liz.